Hi, this is Lisa,
And this is Denise.
and we're the Outback Sisters.
And welcome to our little blog.
Yes, and today we've started the first of our battlegrounds, which is the Gallipoli battleground, which involved Australian under the ANZAC banner.
Okay, so you ready?
Yep, let's get into it.
Well, let's tackle this. Okay, so the peninsula runs in a southwesterly direction into the Aegean Sea between Dardanelles, formerly known as Hellespont, and the Gulf of Saros, formerly the Bay of Melasse. In antiquity, it was protected by the Long Walla defensive structure built across the narrowest part of the peninsula near the ancient city of Agora. The isthmus traversed by the wall was only 36 stadia in breadth, or about 6.5 kilometres, but the length of the peninsula from this wall to its southern extremity, Cape Mastusha, was 420 stadia, or about 77.5 kilometres.
During World War One, from 1914 to 1918, French, British, and Allied forces, which were the Australian, New Zealand, Newfoundland, Irish, and Indian, fought the Gallipoli campaign. And that was between 1915 to 1916. In and near this peninsula, seeking to secure a sea route to relieve their eastern ally, Russia. The Ottomans set up defences along the peninsula and contained the invading forces.
In early 1915, attempting to seize a strategic advantage in World War One by capturing the Bosporus Strait at Istanbul, formerly Constantinople, the British authorities authorised an attack on the peninsula by French, British, and British Empire forces. The first Australian troops landed at Anzac Cove early in the morning of the 25th of April 1915. After 8 months of heavy fighting, the last Allied soldiers withdrew by the 9th of January 1916.
The campaign, one of the greatest Ottoman victories during the war, is considered by historians as a humiliating Allied failure. Turks regard it as a defining moment in their nation's history and national identity, contributing to the establishment of the Republic of Turkey 8 years later. President Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, who first rose to prominence as the commander of Gallipoli.
The Ottoman Empire instituted the Gallipoli Star as a military decoration in 1915 and awarded it throughout the rest of World War One. The campaign was the first major military action of Australia and New Zealand, now known as the ANZACs, as independent dominions, setting a foundation for Australian and New Zealand military history and contributing to their developing national identities. The date of the landing, 25th of April, is now commonly known as Anzac Day. It remains the most significant commemoration of military casualties and returned soldiers in Australia and New Zealand.
On the Allied side, one of the promoters of the expedition was Britain's First Lord of the Admiralty, Winston Churchill, whose bullish optimism caused damage to his reputation that took years to repair. Prior to the Allied landing in April 1915, the Ottoman Empire deported Greek residents from Gallipoli and the surrounding region and from the islands in the Sea of Marmara to the interior, where they were at the mercy of hostile Turks. The Greeks had little time to pack, and the Ottoman authorities permitted them to take only some bedding, and the rest was handed over to the government. The Turks then plundered the houses and properties. A testimony of a deportee described how the deportees were forced into crowded steamers, standing room only. Then, on disembarking, men of military age were removed for forced labour in the labour battalions of the Ottoman Empire. The rest were scattered among the farms like ownerless cattle.
The Metropolitan Bishop of Gallipoli wrote on the 17th of July 1915 that the extermination of the Christian refugees was methodical. He also mentioned that the Turks, like beasts of prey, immediately plundered all the Christian properties and carried it off. The inhabitants and refugees of my district are entirely without shelter, waiting to be sent to no one knows where. Many Greeks died from hunger, and there were frequent cases of rape of women and young girls, as well as their forced conversion to Islam. In some cases, immigrants appeared in the villages even before the Greek inhabitants were deported and stoned the houses and threatened the inhabitants that they would kill them if they did not leave.
Well, sounds very familiar. The ongoing deadlock on the Western Front led the Allies to formulate plans to attack Turkey, an ally of the Central Powers. If the Turkish capital Constantinople, now Istanbul, was attacked via the Dardanelles Strait, it might relieve the pressure on Britain's ally Russia. It could also open a supply route to Russia through the Black Sea, and at best knock Turkey out of the war altogether. Plans were made for a naval expedition to seize the Dardanelles in February and March 1915. Given their strategic importance, the straits were well defended by minefields and fortifications. There were also many Turkish gun emplacements along the Gallipoli Peninsula to the north and the Asian coast to the south.
General Sir Ian Hamilton was tasked with leading a hastily planned invasion that underestimated the Ottoman defences. He lacked specialised landing craft and had to lead a disparate body of troops, few of whom were trained for this type of warfare.
His force consisted of the British 29th Division, the Royal Naval Division, the French Oriental Expeditionary Corps, 29th Indian Brigade, and the Australian and New Zealand Army Corps, which are the ANZAC, whose exploits became a legend in their home countries.
So early on the 25th of April 1915, while the French made a diversionary attack at Kam Kale on the Asian shore, the 29th Division landed on the tip of the peninsula at Cape Hills. It aimed to capture Krithia and the nearby high ground of Akibaba, and then push northwards to the forts overlooking the Dardanelles. A second amphibious landing was made by the Anzac at Gabatepe, later renamed Anzac Cove, to the north. This force was to advance to the heights of Saribar and, once in control of them, move across the peninsula to cut off the southern half and prevent the Ottoman reinforcements arriving.
The 29th Division landed in 5 beaches at Hels. Y Beach was relatively undefended, and the troops advanced to within a third of a mile, or 500 metres, of Krithia, but it was evacuated the following day when Ottoman reinforcements arrived.
At W and V beaches, the British faced well-defended positions, obstructed with barbed wire, and suffered appalling casualties. At V Beach, men disembarked from ports cut in the side of the troop ship SS River Clyde, but faced heavy machine gun fire from Sadelbar Fortress. Out of the first wave of 200 men, only 21 men made it ashore. It was a turkey shoot.
I reckon. The Turks tried desperately. That
That was a sick joke, and I never even thought about it.
Oh dear, forget the pun. Pardon the pun. The Turks tried desperately to drive the British off the beaches, but were unable to do so. Crucially, the Gurkhas took the high ground of Sari, Blair, above the landing beaches. The fighting at W Beach was so furious that the Lancashire Fusiliers won the unprecedented 6 VCs, Victoria Cross Awards, before breakfast. Just a little note, everyone, that the Gurkhas consisted of several different ethnic groups and clans and tribes, including the Khas or Khetri, a high caste Hindu group. Others include the Gurung, Magars, Limbus, Tamang, and Race. Most Gurkhas are either Hindu or Buddhist. They had fought alongside the British for years.
At Anzac Cove, although the Turkish defences were less organised, the landing vessels drifted to the north of their intended position, forcing the men to go ashore at the base of a steep cliff. The Australians, on cresting the ridge after an uphill scramble, found Ottoman reinforcements arriving. They made for the heights of Chunkbar and Hill 971. Hill 971, or Koja Chiman Tepe, the highest point of the Saribar Ridge. Gallipoli was the objective of the 4th Infantry Brigade as part of the main breakout operations from Anzac in early August 1915. The intention was to seize the high ground between Hill 971 and Chinook Bear in order to secure a drive across the peninsula to capture the forts guarding the straits. The 4th Brigade, forming part of the left column of the assaulting force, advanced during the night of the 6th of August, but made slow progress due to the difficult terrain, and by the dawn of 7th of August were well short of its objective. An assault on the summit attempted on the 8th of August was a costly failure. The Ottoman commander, Colonel Mustafa Kemal, later called Atarok, realised the Anzac landing was not a feint and in fact presented a huge risk to the defence of the peninsula. He personally led the 57th Regiment in a counterattack. Kemal's quick thinking pinned down the invaders quickly above Anzac Cove and surrounded them.
Hamilton was determined to extend the Allied position in the south with the attacks directed from Hell's Point, Krithia, and the nearby hill of Akbaba. The troops would then link up with the soldiers of Anzac Cove at Anzac Cove. Once Krithia was in Allied hands, Hamilton intended to continue to push northwards, removing Turkish defenders from the heights defending the straits. 3 successive operations were launched upon Krithia between the 28th of April and 4th of June 1915, all failed to break the Turkish defenders, and the campaign stalled.
After receiving additional reinforcements, Hamilton launched a new offensive on the 6th of August. It took the form of a diversionary action at Hills, a drive from Anzac Cove towards Saribar, and a landing of new divisions at Suvla Bay. This latter force was to link up with the troops at Anzac and then advance across the peninsula. Although the landing caught the Turks by surprise, Lieutenant General Sir Frederick Stopford's men moved inland too slowly, and the enemy was able to occupy the heights overlooking their position. Despite local successes at the places like Lone Pine, the wider offensive had lost momentum by the 10th of August due to tough Turkish resistance and indecisive Allied commands.
Lieutenant Colonel Henry Jourdain described the fighting of Lone Pine in his diary, April 7th, 1915. At 4 a.m., the guns opened the bombardment and the trenches all round opened independent fire. The noise was deafening and the effects simply awful. For a full half hour, the terrific bombardment went on, and then the colonels advanced in the attack. They took the plateau with great gallantry. Several hospital ships came in this morning, and wounded men were taken down towards the landing stage at Anzac. The Australians are admired by all, and have shown the most splendid dash and courage, but the stream of dead and wounded continued throughout the afternoon. From my position, I could see the Cornwall assisting with her guns from the sea. The fighting went on all day, not a second being free from rifle and big gunfire. Some of the Indian Mule Corps passing down with shells and rations came to the notice of the people in Gallipoli tepi, and shot after shot of shrapnel burst near the train, killing and wounding several of the mules and native drivers. In late August, another attempt was made to break out of Suvla and the link up with the Anzac Cove, but the battles of Scimitar Hill and Hill 60 both failed, and Hamilton's troops were forced to dig in. The Allies remained trapped there, the three beachheads at Helles, Anzac, and Suvla Bay.
Each of these was overlooked by high ground commanded by strong Ottoman forces and was under constant artillery and sniper fire. The soldiers lived and fought in appalling conditions. Casualties from heat and disease overwhelmed the inadequate medical facilities.
A diary description of conditions at Suvla by Trooper Leonard Bullwinkle on the 1st to the 3rd of August 1915. Water and mud in trenches is plentiful. It is cold, damp at night. The bodies in long grass in front of the trench smell horribly. Flies in millions. Got the squirts a little this morning. We shall soon have a good crop of disease. The Turks get the jumps nearly every night and set up a tremendous rifle and machine gun fire. Their snipers have shot one or two chaps through loopholes. Went off grub after midday and felt pretty sick. Throughout the day, we improved trench and tried to rest, but the heat and flies, coupled with the lack of floor room, made this impossible. At 5 p.m., I paraded sick, and the doctor gave me some tablets. I had to be relieved from guard in the afternoon because I felt so rotten. Spewed and had some violent squirts again. The Turks made a big attack on the left flank, but were repelled. Had a frightful restless night and a fearful stomach pains. This is bloody awful. The poor
It's
man.
horrible.
That poor man, and then having to battle.
It's terrible. With winter looming and still little prospects of a breakthrough, talk of a withdrawal was raised in London. Hamilton resisted, fearing the loss of both his own and British prestige. He was dismissed and replaced by Lieutenant General Sir Charles Munro. In October 1915, Bulgaria joined the Central Powers and Allied troops deployed to Salonika, creating a it's not even that hard, creating a competing front for reinforcements. In November, it was decided to withdraw the Allied army from Gallipoli. This was completed with minimal losses by the 9th of January 1916. The evacuation was one of the best organised elements of the whole campaign.
We can't go in, but we can get out. We can get in, but we can get out of there quick enough. I like that. The Allies suffered over 220,000 casualties out of a force of nearly 500,000. That's nearly half their men.
Nearly half.
From their point of view, the campaign was a disaster. The Turks suffered almost as many casualties, but their victory at Gallipoli rejuvenated the Ottoman war effort. Further success followed at Kut in Mesopotamia, and there were renewed deployments into Sinai. Most of the drawn Allied troops regrouped in Egypt, where they provided much needed reinforcements for the Sinai and Palestine campaign.
Who were the ANZACs? They were formed in Egypt in December 1914. They operated during the Gallipoli campaign. General William Birdwood commanded the corps, which primarily consisted of troops from the 1st Australian Imperial Force and the 1st New Zealand Expeditionary Force. Although there were also British and Indian units attached at times throughout the campaign, the corps disbanded in 1916 following the Allied evacuation of the Gallipoli Peninsula and the formation of one Anzac Corps and two Anzac Corps. The Corps was re-established briefly in the Second World War during the Battle of Greece in 1941. The term ANZAC has been used since for joint Australia-New Zealand units of different sizes.
All volunteer force by the end of the war, the AIF had gained a reputation as being a well-trained and highly effective military force, playing a significant role in the final Allied victory. However, the reputation came at a heavy cost, with the casualty rate among the highest of any belligerent for the war. The remaining troops were repatriated until the disbandment of the first AIF between 1919 and 1921. After the war, the achievements of the AIF and its soldiers were colloquially as diggers.
Colloquial.
That'll do it. I've heard the word, but I just don't know how to say it. As diggers.
Known colloquially as the diggers.
Became central to the national mythology of the Anzac legends. Generally known at the time as the AIF, it is today referred to as the first AIF to distinguish it from the second Australian Imperial Force raised during World War II.
The Anzac spirit, or the Anzac legend, is a concept which suggests that Australia and New Zealand soldiers possesses shared characteristics, specifically the qualities those soldiers allegedly. I'm going to start again. Hang on. The Anzac spirit or Anzac legend is a concept which suggests that Australian and New Zealand soldiers possess shared characteristics, specifically the qualities those soldiers allegedly exemplified on the battlefields of World War I. These preserved qualities include endurance, courage, ingenuity, good humour, larrikinism, and mateship. According to this concept, the soldiers are perceived to have been innocent and fit, stoical and laconic, irreverent in the face of authority, naturally egalitarian, and disdainful of British class differences.
The Anzac spirit also tend to capture the idea of the Australian and New Zealand national character, with the Gallipoli campaign sometimes described as the moment of birth of the nationhood, both of Australia and New Zealand. It was first expressed in the reporting of the landing at Anzac Cove by Ellis Ashmead Bartlett, as well as later on and much more extensively by Charles Bean. It is regarded as an Australian legend, although its critics refer to it as the Anzac myth.
Critics must be modern day people, because I think in the period,
There wouldn't have been any critics.
To them, you listen to them, not what people say since then.
The only thing sorry,
I
was going to say the only thing you would listen to now is more figures and facts, because they're more up on the figures and the facts now.
But they would have had the figures and facts back then too.
No. I think they're still finding bodies. They would be classed as
but they knew how many soldiers went to war, and they know how many soldiers came back.
Maybe. Okay.
Coming just 14 years after the Federation of Australia, the Gallipoli campaign was one of the first international events that saw Australians taking part, as Australians are not just an attachment to some larger army. As such, it has been seen as a key event in forging a sense of national identity. According to history professor Dr. Frank Bongiorno, the Gallipoli campaign was the beginning of true Australian nationhood. When Australia went to war in 1914, many white Australians believed that their Commonwealth had no history, and it was not yet a true nation, that its most glorious days still lay ahead of it. In this sense, the Gallipoli campaign was a defining moment for Australia as a new age.
I don't know if I bet. What do you think? Do you think that Australians in 1900 did think that they had a history?
What was that?
It just said that many white Australians believe that their Commonwealth had no history.
I think even then, I think that they saw themselves as larrikins.
Yeah.
And they saw their history as it's not the right word I'm looking for, as standing up for yourself, being different, being they were classless, they were
So maybe a
I think
bit of
they
a
had a
broken.
sense of history. I guess the only thing I can say about when they went to the war, it brought that history um to a point where it was a shared history, I guess.
Yeah.
But I would argue that the point is that the war also brought the Aboriginal people who also fought in the war in with the colonial
It was disjointed.
history.
I think the history was disjointed. So
Yeah, and I
we had
think
no idea what our stand was in a lot of things.
and
But
I think
it
the
was,
go on.
I was just going to say, but it was, you even think of feminism, that was happening here even
Yeah,
before World War One. So
yeah.
she had a history. She was starting her own society.
I think that before the war, Australia had already set itself aside from the British colony that it had
Yeah.
begun as.
Yeah.
It already had a culture. It already had, like I said, it was classless, so
Yeah.
it had a culture. I guess by 1914, maybe the thing was by not in when they started the war, when they went into the war, the Australian culture was then made laid bare because everybody could see it. It also included, like I said, I think it more included Aboriginals. They went to war too. I
Mm.
know that they were not
Not
in
mentioned
any
in the
stretch of
history
the
book.
imagination
Mm.
included in the culture as they are now.
Mm.
But I do believe that was kind of the beginning of, or
Yeah.
one of the beginnings of our shared culture.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do. I think they already had the beginnings of a culture back, or a history back
Yeah.
then. A shared history. Yeah, I do. Though I do think that it was a very important point in Australian history. Um, Unfortunately, we don't acknowledge it now, and we don't understand it now. But I think it was the point where Australia became a little
He grew up.
David
I think
David who was willing to fight a Goliath.
it grew
You
up.
know, it was
Well, we don't need
it
to
became,
serve under England. We don't need to do that. We
even though they were at the mercy of the rules and the
Yeah,
instructions of the um
that were,
imperial
yeah.
forces.
But it certainly broke
But
away
I
by
think,
World War Two.
yeah, I think that it was the beginning of their future, but they did have a history before
Yeah.
that. Yeah, I definitely think so. Where we have to.
Ernest Scott's influential.
Ernest Scott's influential short history of Australia, which remained a standard school text for nearly 4 decades, from 1916 and went through 6 editions in its author's lifetime, clearly enunciated this concept. In the preface to the book, Scott linked the European settlement of Australia with the idea of Australia being a nation on the battlefields of Gallipoli. The short history of Australia begins with a blank space on the map and ends with a record of a new name on the map, that of ANZAC.
Charles Bean
Yeah, I
also,
don't know if I agree, but
sorry,
whatever. I
um,
don't think I agree. I don't think there was nothing here before Gallipoli.
maybe. I
I
don't know.
don't. We just discussed it. I don't think there
Yeah,
was. I think there was a country, a growing country.
yeah.
Yeah.
It wasn't didn't have much worth. They were did. I don't know. Just watching. Um
Oh, okay.
Charles Bean also propagated his view, extending the notion to suggest that New Zealand's nationhood was also born in the First World War in 1924. Bean wrote that Anzac Day was now belongs to the past, and during the war, all energy was concentrated on the future. But the influence of the Gallipoli campaign from the national life of Australia and New Zealand has been far too deep to fade. It was on the 25th of April 1915 that the consciousness of nationhood was born.
The popular belief that the Anzacs, through their spirit, forged Australia's national character is still today frequently expressed. For example, in 2006, the Governor-General of Australia, Michael Jeffrey, gave an address in which he said that although the Anzac lost the campaign, they had created a lasting identity for Australia. We are summoned to recall the battle sacrifices of Australian farmers and tally clerks, teachers and labourers, and to commemorate outstanding courage and strength of character in the face of sustained adversity. The campaign won for us an enduring sense of national identity based on those iconic traits of mateship, courage, compassion and nous.
An extension of this belief is the idea that ANZAC set an example for future generations of Australians to follow. Laying the bedrock of Australian values, in 2007, the Australian Defence Minister Brendan Nelson articulated this view, stating that the ANZAC forged values are ours and make us who we are, reminding us that there are some truths by which we live. Nelson had earlier argued that the story of Simpson and the donkey rescuing wounded men at Gallipoli represents everything that's at the heart of what it means to be an Australian.
Yes, definitely. The ANZAC spirit is also sometimes said to be exhibited during Australian civilian crisis. For example, the Return and Services League of Australia states, the spirit of the ANZAC continues today. In times of hardship such as cyclones, floods and bushfires, at those times Australians come together to rescue one another, to ease suffering, to provide food and shelter, to look after one another, and to let the victims of these disasters know that they are not alone. In New Zealand, the ANZAC spirit is similarly pointed to in some quarters as forming an important component of New Zealand national identity. The New Zealand Government Ministry of Cultural and Heritage states New Zealand soldiers distinguish themselves with their courage, their skill, establish an enduring bond with the Australians they fought alongside. Great suffering was caused to a small country by the loss of so many of its young men.
Pause.
But the Gallipoli campaign showcased attitudes and attributes, bravery, tenacity, practicality, ingenuity, loyalty to king and comrades, that helped New Zealand define itself as a nation, even as it fought unquestioningly on the other side of the world in the name of the British Empire. After Gallipoli, New Zealand had a greater confidence in its distinct identity and a greater pride in the international contribution it could make. And the mutual respect earned during the fighting formed the basis of the close ties with Australia that continue today. Criticism Professor Manning Clark, in his influential work A History of Australia, suggested a contrasting image of the innocent and honorable ANZAC soldier. From a range of sources, he provided evidence of the soldiers' bad behavior. For example, he documented that, as recruits, some indulged in sex orgies with an 18-year-old girl at the Broadmeadows camp before being shipped to war. Others confronted police in violent scuffles on the streets of Melbourne. Clark also recorded that in Egypt some soldiers burned the belongings of local people, brawled, got drunk and rioted. Other scholars, such as Professor of Politics at La Trobe University, Robert Mann, have also questioned the veracity of the ANZAC legend, arguing that it is more accurate to describe the concept as a mythology. The Dr. Dale Blair of Deakin University suggests that, while traits such as egalitarianism, resourcefulness, and initiative are assumed and maintained in the nation's popular memory as a truthful representation not only of Australia's First World War soldiers, but also of the national character, they were not sufficiently evident in the experience of the 1st Battalion at Gallipoli to justify their advancement as characteristics general to Australian soldiers or the nation.